I repaired a floor in my Tulsa tank. Things you would only do for your father. Is this looking like it's ready for underarms? Am I running out of yarn? Who knows? I'm not that aggressive with my projects. Interesting. Clematis. Clematis. Clematis.
Clematis.
Clematis. Oh yeah, I could just weave in some elastic. That's what people do, right? All of these drivers are sitting in the car watching me as I'm sewing and pulling, 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 pulling. Is your name Nora?
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for another podcast episode today. Again, it has been a bit of a whirlwind of a week. So as I'm filming, it is actually Friday, August 30th, which means that this video will be edited today and then up in the morning for you to watch. So I'm curious to see where this goes. I usually do try to film a little bit earlier in the week, but it's just the way that the cookie crumbled. And so let's see what we get into. I did get a good bit of knitting done this week, so I'm going to be sharing with you two of the major whips that are making some progress, one of which is almost done, just a little bit left to go with that, as well as a sort of resurrected whip that just didn't make an appearance last week, but I mean, I literally knit a row on this week. If you're new here, like I said, I'm Nora. I'm coming to you from a small farm in Connecticut, and I have been knitting for just over a year and a half now. My sort of making philosophy is that the imperfections are what make something so perfectly handmade. So if that feels like something that you can get on board with, then I definitely recommend you come hang out with us more often. I do post these weekly podcast videos every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And I think with all that out of the way, we should go ahead and dive on in. I do like to talk about my whips in the order of how long they've been on the needles. So I will start this week with the project that has made the least amount of progress, but didn't even make an appearance last week. And that is my Tulsa tank. This is the Tulsa tank pattern by Rebecca Clow. In that pattern, there's a DK weight version as well as a fingering weight version, and they include 3 different neckline options. However, all of them are knit from the bottom up. So I know I am personally undecided still on the neckline that I'm going to choose, but I do think I'll be going for the vest option for this one. I'm knitting this tank top in the size 4. I never did a gauge swatch, and I am knitting it out of Drops Fabelle in the colorway red. It's some leftover stash yarn that I had. So here we have this little project so far. This is simply my purse knitting, or what some people may consider their sock knitting. This is basically, that's the role that this is playing for me in my knitting, as I'm just not in a sock knitting stage of my life personally. And literally I did not make any progress over the last podcast. This was glossed over because I had not touched it because I had run out of my ball of yarn, and to join in another ball of yarn was outside of the capacity I had. However, literally last night, I looked at this in the corner and it just looked so sad and neglected. So I did go and add the second ball to this. I am knitting mine on 2.5 millimeter needles, although I do believe that the recommended needle for the fingering weight version is a 3 millimeter. I really wanted my fabric to be kind of as dense as possible because I would like this to have kind of 0 to negative ease. And I never gauge swatched. I have no idea what this is going to turn into. I suppose at some point when it looks like I should be splitting for the front and back, so reaching that underarm point, I should try this on then and see if it's even going to fit. If not, we'll kind of see what we need to do then. But really the point is for this to just be the most mindless of mindless knitting. So I have a progress keeper here. I quite literally knit a row on this last night and then just to join in that ball of yarn. So I'm simply going to shift that up and we'll see. I kind of wanted to get this going because of the state that my other whips are in. I wanted to make sure that this was ready to just go back in the handbag for some mindless knitting. I also have currently worked up one full ball of the Drops Fabelle, and then this is the only other full ball of that yarn that I had. So I'm going to get working with this as I'm approaching that underarm length. I will figure out kind of just, where things are at. I have a couple of other major scraps of yarn, so probably a quarter to a half of another ball. So it's going to be a little game of, is this looking like it's ready for underarms? Am I running out of yarn? Who knows? And I'll go with the flow as we get there. So again, it's really not all that important. I just wanted to get this yarn out of stash and to knit up something very simple. So that is the role that this is playing. And I'm just letting you know it got worked on again. So that is the Tulsa Tank by Rebecca Clow. This project has been on the needles for 48 days, which is truly, that's just how little this gets worked on. This is the last resort knitting of sorts. Hope that makes sense. I am going to just switch the order around a little bit because I want to save the project that has made the most amount of progress for the end this week, just because I feel like I have more to say about it. So let's get these other projects kind of out of the way. The next one I'm going to tell you about is my Cordelia skirt by Witchery Designs. This is part of what should be a set. So there's a matching kind of tank vest and this midi length skirt. I am knitting it in Drops Belle in the colorways black and mint cream. And I'm knitting mine in the size extra large, even though my gauge is a little bit off. So I guess I'm looking for a slightly smaller size, but knitting it in that size extra large. And the intended needle size for this project is 4mm needles. However, I've dropped mine down to a 3.75mm needle. Here we have it. I do believe we're officially at a point where this would cover me sort of appropriately. And I am holding it currently by the needles, which means that this is actually upside down right now. So the cast on edge is what is going to be sitting at the waist, and then I'm knitting down towards the length of it all. Unfortunately, my progress keeper actually broke on this one this week. So you might see this little just gold chain here. There was a really beautiful little epoxy floral charm kind of on that, and it broke off. And at first I thought maybe I was, maybe I had like hit it on something and it cracked. And then I thought about it. I actually had this project with me a bit this week. And so I had it in the car for a while and it was a really warm week. So I think that there's a chance that sitting in the hot car, the epoxy may have like melted. And then just the little part where the metal eye kind of goes into the epoxy, that was where it looks like it just kind of split. And so if you have epoxy progress keepers or anything like that on your projects, maybe be careful. I'm feeling that that's the most accurate thing because I couldn't imagine that I had like chucked this up against the wall or something in such a way. Like I'm not that aggressive with my projects. So I was surprised when I saw that it had just, it just broke off. So, next week, I'm going to be switching out this progress keeper for another one. So for the time being, we're just going to leave that little charm there because I have some exciting new progress keepers to tell you about more next week. But based on that, we could see that I have knit just an additional 2, and I guess I finished the contrast stripe I was working on. So like 2.5 contrast stripes. And so this did not make quite as much progress as it had the week before. And that's just because I really was prioritizing my other WIP. Now, the only thing with this one, and I did hear you, those of you who asked if I could film a little tutorial on the twisting of the yarn as I work my way through the stripes. So I haven't been cutting the yarn as I go. I've just been carrying the different strands of yarn up in like a long chain on the side where I'm switching colors. And then each time I switch a color, I just give it a little twist. I hear you. I will try to find some time in the next couple of weeks. These are like, this is my busy season as a bridal hairstylist. We have crazy fall weddings this year. So again, capacity, we're working on it, but I will definitely get to that before this project is over so that you can see exactly how I've been doing that, because that is, I think, going to be from now on my preferred method of handling and managing the yarn while I knit up on stripes. But I think that maybe next week we should try this on, because, and I'm just going to throw it out there now so we could start kind of crowdsourcing advice for this. This pattern is intended to just be knit down to the length that you want, and there is no vent or slit or anything like that in it. And I'm feeling a little bit nervous that if that's the case, I feel like what's going to wind up happening then is that I'm going to be walking around in this, and it's going to do that thing where your legs just sort of like hit the front and the back of the skirt. And in doing so, I feel like I'm going to wind up stretching out the bottom of the skirt quite a bit. And I don't want that. And as appealing as it is to just keep knitting this in the stockinette sort of tube that it is, I don't want to then get to the end and regret not adding a vent or a slit or something. If you have advice on this, I would like to know what you think. I feel like for the sake of it looking as true to the original design as possible, I would opt for just a vent along the back, kind of starting closer to the back of my knees, and then just going down to the end, which would then mean knitting basically the next half of this flat. So again, it's not the most appealing option as far as the working on this, but if it's the more practical option for actually wearing it and enjoying the way that it looks over time, I think it's something that I should consider. But in doing so, in making that vent, it definitely is going to mean that I will have to come up with a sort of solution for finishing those edges, which this is intended to be finished with some ribbing at the bottom. I guess I could sort of just add some ribbing to the edges then of that vent. But I'm curious. I'm curious to know what you guys think. I do still need to knit the waistband on this. So the pattern tells you to knit the waistband, which is a folded over stockinette bit that you insert elastic into and then knit the skirt. But she tells you in the pattern that you may as well just knit the pieces separately and then just sew them together in the end, which is why I wound up going and just knitting the skirt, because I actually had knit the waistband first and it was just massive. That was a whole situation. So I decided to just start knitting the skirt so that I could make sure that this was doing what I needed it to do. And then I could also kind of utilize the waistband as an opportunity to maybe shrink things in a little bit or keep them a little bit bigger if I needed to. So there's also some things that need to happen with that department. But yeah, I'm just curious to know what you would do for an event, how you would finish that. Is it worth doing it? I also thought it was worth mentioning that I think that this might be the first time ever I am knitting a project with the recommended yarn, or at least one of the recommended yarns. I can't think if I've ever done that before, but this project does say, let me look exactly. There's actually a whole list of recommended yarns here, which I really appreciate. It says recommended yarn, Rauma Petunia, Rauma Pellini. We are knitters, the cotton, drops muscat, drops bell. So that's what I'm using. garnlina, or similar. So it is intended to be knit up in this plant fiber makeup, but I feel like if it was knit in a wool, it would have a little bit more of that elasticity and that bounce back. So if it is just a tube and your knees and legs are kind of stretching out the hem a bit, maybe that's not as much of a concern. So I guess I just don't know if it's something I should worry about or not, but it feels like a problem to me. Or is that just me making more work for myself? I have a skirt that I am kind of trying to model this after. Actually, I think it's sitting next to me here. Yeah, it's kind of random, but this is the Old Navy skirt that is a linen viscose skirt. I'm kind of trying to recreate the fit of with the Cordelia skirt I have here. And this one does include a pretty large vent in the back. So this is the vent. And so, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stand up back here and hold up the skirt waist to each other, and maybe let's see where it's hitting as compared to the vent on the Old Navy skirt that I'm modeling this after, because then we'll have a better idea if I should start worrying about that soon or not. Of course, I know that this being a plant fiber, I'm going to want to block it to make sure that the length is right and all that. I did do my gauge swatch for this one. I did measure before and after the gauge swatch on this one. And so I know to anticipate some growth in blocking, but I think we should just check and see kind of around about what things are going to look like. Interesting. Okay, so you should have seen there that we are just a few inches away from where the linen skirt has the vent starting, which now makes me wonder, should I block this skirt to see how it's fitting before I continue? Because if it grows that few inches, should I start the vent? So let's see. This is why sometimes it's really nice to have the podcast, not only as a space that I get to just come to, and I always just say thank you for giving me this space to sit down and simply think about and talk about my knitting. It's a really fun time for me to do that. But also, it's one of those things that if I didn't have the podcast, I can't imagine that I would actually think about these things in such great detail. It sort of forces me to, which is really good, because otherwise I'd probably be very hasty about a lot of knitting decisions and I would wind up with a lot of projects that I don't love. But let's see. So I am just 2 rows away from being done with this main color stripe. So perhaps what I will do tonight is wrap up those 2 rows of the contrast stripe. And then try this on and block it. That would be a very wise thing to do. And since today is Friday and this video will be going up tomorrow, it gives me the perfect amount of time to hopefully field some answers for my questions here without feeling like I want to jump the gun on that. So I think that's a good idea. I think that's a wise idea. Let me finish up that main color stripe today. Get this kind of tried on. Of course, I'm going to have to just be holding it up because the waistband with the elastic in it is what's really going to be holding this onto my body. So I could probably even make some decisions about that waistband, exactly how I want to knit it, maybe what size needles and all I'll be knitting it on. Because the first time I had knit the waistband, I was doing it all based off of my gauge and everything, and therefore the size skirt I wanted to knit. And I had basically cast it on in the largest size and knit the full waistband in that largest size, and then wound up changing my mind and dropping down to the extra large. So that's 2 sizes smaller. So I'm guessing that if I do knit the waistband in the extra large, it's going to work out fine, especially because I have the wiggle room of the elastic inside. That's what's going to make sure that this stays on no matter what. I just would like to avoid as much as possible like excess fabric at creating a gather effect on the waistband. I'd like it to be pretty clean like it is in the project photos. So I feel like I had a lot of good ideas there. They were all very scattered though. So number 1, finish the contrast stripe or the main color stripe today. 2 will be to get this blocking this weekend. 3 will be to wait to see what you guys think about the vent in the back. I feel like everyone's going to say, yes, that's a good idea. Just do it. Whereas I'm like, I just want my stockinette tube. But that is kind of why I got the Tulsa tank into a place where it's just back going on the needles. So I still have my stockinette in the round. And then while this is blocking, I can start the waistband again so that I have that other component going. But realistically, it seems like we're about halfway through this project, and I have not yet said it's been on the needles for 22 days. So overall, a very quick knit. For the size, I think a lot of times people see these skirts and dresses and it looks like so much knitting, and it is, but it really does go by pretty quickly, especially when it is such just a stockinette tube for most of the project. So yeah, I think that those are some really good thoughts that we're having, and I'm eager to see what you all think about those ideas. So Cordelia skirt, witchery design, size extra large, drop spell, needs to be blocked, and it's been on the needles for 22 days today. This next project is the one that I have been really focusing on really for over the past couple of weeks. And that is the clematis. I can't figure out how to say it. I say it differently every time I think I get it right. So clematis vest by Emma Mayer. And I am knitting mine in Sanasgarn Lena in the colorway black. This is a really fun little button-down vest that has the button placket going diagonally across the body. And since I have been really focusing on this, I have made so much progress over the past week, and this is the one that I actually think we're really close to being done with. All right, we have brought out Miss Helena the hanger to help show off this knit. Now, little bit of a side note, I put just a bag over the hanger today so that you could see, because I didn't have the t-shirt handy, but I'm thinking of sewing up something that is sort of just like intended to go on this hanger, where I can have one in black and white depending on what's going on top of it. Let me know if something like this that doesn't have the sleeves, I think this is a little bit less distracting. So we're still experimenting a little bit here, but I do appreciate your feedback so much. Oh, speaking of feedback, thank you also for the feedback about the information paper in the corner. This week, I'm going to try having it just kind of come in and out as I'm introducing and closing out a project, or anytime that information becomes more relevant. I just thought it would be helpful. Like I said in my comments last week, I had seen my friend over at Jackie is Making. She has a really fun podcast. If you guys have not seen it, I do recommend you checking her out. But I loved that she had that information on the screen for the duration of her podcast. And I thought it might be nice to try something like that over here, just so that I know personally when I'm watching podcasts, I'm usually knitting and I might miss like what the project was. But I did feel like on my video, and it could just be the way that I had done it, it was a little bit distracting. So let me know if this week having it come in and out is more or less distracting. And if you have any other ways that you think we could improve over here, just let me know. I am constantly trying to make things better. it keeps things fun for me, but also I really want to strive to always be doing better things for you. So thank you for the feedback on that. Let me know if this week was better or worse or what all you think about it. But anyway, here is let's just settle in one version today. I'll do a quick Google search on how to pronounce this word. How to pronounce clematis. Oh, okay. Here, let's hear what she says.
Clematis.
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 Clematis. I could turn it on slow.
Clematis.
Clematis. So this is my clematis vest, and it is clearly so close to being done. This is such a fascinating project to me because we've been a little bit all over the place with this one. I gauge swatched for this. Like I said, I'm using that Santa Scarlina, and I do understand, and a few people have pointed this out, which is actually very helpful, that the original design for this one was knit in more of a woolly wool, but I don't remember if it was in the Ravelry page or somewhere on Instagram. She had said that you really can play around with the fiber to kind of make this either more summery or more of a fall knit or what. And I truly did want this to actually take the place of what I'm wearing right now, or not to take the place of, but to be another option for these just like linen vest tops that I have. I really want this to be interchangeable with this shell that I have and love. So I decided therefore to knit it up in a more summer fiber, which is the Santa Scarlina. And having done so, we've just discovered that it changes the gauge a lot. And I think also there might be a little bit more positive ease built into this pattern than it claims to have. And I only feel that way because a couple of other people have said that they've been knitting this or had knit it, and they also felt like they got a garment that was a little bit bigger than what they expected. I thought originally I would need to knit this in the size extra large, but having cast it on and knitting it in the large, I found that with that, it was too big. So I have sort of modified this where it was cast on in the size large, knit down to the underarm, at which point I removed some stitches. And so the actual body of this is very close to the size medium instead. So if you're seeing this and thinking that our, sizing might be similar, which by the way, I always have my sizing listed at the bottom of my description box, then that might be just a good indication for you. I knit the top in the size large, and then the underarm down is very, very close to the size medium. I think I'm just a couple of stitches off. So, and I had done that just by removing some of those cast on stitches in the underarm, because I was finding that it was just creating this really big body for me, which I didn't want. That being said too, this fabric tends to change a lot in blocking, that it actually kind of shrinks up a little bit. But again, having been able to chat about that with you all, a lot of people have said that they have knit with this yarn and also experienced that vertical shrinkage in blocking. However, in wearing, they found that the garment then tended to sort of drop down to its original length. So I've just had all of these factors in the back of my head, and it's made this project kind of feel like a bit of a gamble, because I think most people have said they thought that theirs kind of wound up shrinking and then coming back down because of the overall weight of the garment, whereas this does not have sleeves. This does not have a ton of length to it. So there really isn't a lot of growing or weight. There isn't a lot of weight for this to overly grow once it's on my body. So I've just been kind of trying to say I've blocked the whole top of it. The bottom has not yet been blocked, but I don't know. We're at like ballparking things here. I think it's a little bit long at the moment, but if it shrinks up too much, it's going to be too short. So I'm hoping that somewhere in there, we're going to find a middle ground, and hopefully this fits in the end. The good thing though, I think about this yarn is that there is a bit of play in blocking because I can sort of stretch it out if I need to in any which direction, but my goal is to block this and simply pin it without stretching it at all. Now, where we are at the moment, which I never put a progress keeper on this, so sorry about that. But where we are right now is that the full garment is done except the button placket. So what I accomplished over the past week was finishing the body as well as knitting the ribbing that finishes the armholes. I had already done the ribbing on the neck. I just don't think that I had mentioned that when it came to picking up stitches on the neck, I did pick up a few less than the pattern stated, and I did that while following the recommended pickup rates, but just it wound up being a few less than it said, and I ran with it because I did feel like my fabric before blocking or before the ribbing was really open. And I truly did, again, kind of want to mimic the fit of this garment. So I didn't want anything too scoopy. Then when it came time for the armholes, again, I did pick up just a few stitches less than recommended. So it looks like in the neckline, I picked up a total of 14 stitches less than recommended. And on either of the armholes, I only picked up 4 less stitches than recommended, which is interesting because I have significantly fewer stitches in the body. So I don't know, but I thought we could try this on and just make sure everything is looking right. I also, in each the neck and the armholes, I only knit 5 rows of ribbing as compared to the recommended 6 in the pattern. And then something interesting I thought is that in the pattern, she says to finish all of the hems with a tubular bind off. And I actually didn't think too much about it. In the neck and the arms, I knit my 5 rows of ribbing and then simply did a sewn bind off. But then when it came time for the hem, I thought about it a little bit more and considered the fact that when you say a tubular bind off, that usually means that you're going to knit 2 setup rows. And so then I wondered if that was the intent, was to knit 6 rows of ribbing plus 2 setup rows plus the bind off. But the reason I did less rows of ribbing was because I did feel like it was going to be just too much ribbing. Then when it came time to do it in the body, I thought that maybe I should try it. So I don't know why. I just felt like maybe in the ribbing, I could have a little bit more of maybe in the hem, I could have a little bit more height in the ribbing than I did everywhere else. And I also thought when I had done the neckline originally, I found that it was flaring out just slightly. And I thought maybe that was from just the nature of this yarn, of this fiber, that it doesn't have that elasticity again like wool would have. And so those finishes, I thought maybe were just going to flare a little bit, and I really didn't want that. However, I thought for the neckline, for the armholes, if that was becoming an issue, I could probably weave in some elastic. I've never done that. I've heard other people say that they're going to do that. So I feel like, oh yeah, I could just weave in some elastic. That's what people do, right? So that seemed like a good solution if I was having that issue with the hems up top. However, in the bottom, I didn't want things to flare. I also didn't want them to come in at all. And so I thought my best option would be to do those setup rows to help sort of alleviate things. So I knit the full body to the recommended length, which was actually kind of funny. She tells you in the pattern to knit a certain amount of increases and decreases, starting at the shoulder edge and coming down. So that's how you're creating this diagonal shift, is that you're increasing on one side and decreasing on another to just push the whole button pocket to the side. And when I read that in the pattern, I actually interpreted it as do a certain amount of increase and decrease rows, not like increases and decreases total, which every time you increase, you also decrease. So I actually had made a note that I was going to have to knit, I think it was a total of 44 increase and decrease rows, which I was getting to the halfway point of that. And I was thinking like, wow, if I have to knit another 22 rows of increases and decreases, this is going to be really long. And I was like, oh, but my row gauge is all off, so it's probably a me thing. And then I reread it and saw it was just total increases and decreases, which my relief that I only had to do a total of 22 rows of the increases and decreases, because that meant 44 increases and decreases individually total. I just was very relieved when I discovered that. And I did discover it pretty much at the 20th row of increases and decreases. So that was a big win for me. I knit down to that point, tried it on, and I determined I think I was good on the length. And then I knit the ribbing, which I did the I did 4 rows of standard ribbing, then did 2 rows of the setup rows for tubular bind off, so where you're slipping that stitch in between, and then did the sewn bind off. So I'm hoping that by doing the setup rows, it's going to keep things from turning in or flipping out. That was the whole point of what I was saying. I just went off on a whole tangent. But that is the goal with the hem here. I also decided in the sewing of the bind off, I would try to err on the side of it being a little too tight rather than too loose. Again, because of the nature of this fiber, I thought it would be a lot easier to try and stretch that out than it would be to force it to go back in. And because I really don't want to have to put elastic in this hem, that made the most sense to me. So just yesterday, I finished up the hem of this, which I think doing the sewn bind off, I don't mind the process of it, but certainly on like a neckline or an armhole or a cuff, it's so much easier. And then doing this in a body, I felt like it took forever. However, yesterday I was actually picking my friend up from the airport and I arrived extremely early. So I was just sitting in my car in this sort of like waiting parking lot, and it seemed like the perfect time to attack the bind off on this. And so I spent about an hour and a half sewing the bind off. And I've never done that anywhere but like on my couch before. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do a sewn bind off in a vehicle, but when I tell you that every single time I pulled the yarn through, first of all, there's like kind of nowhere for my arm to go as I was pulling that full length of yarn through. So that was a little frustrating. But then every single time it got stuck on the center console, on the passenger side, like seatbelt, receptacle thing, on the gear shift. It got stuck on that. It was getting stuck on literally anything it could. My phone was there. I was getting caught on that. And I was like, this is the most frustrating thing. It was the kind of waiting lot where you weren't like allowed to leave your vehicle. So the lot was full, and mostly with like actual drivers who are all watching me as I'm sewing this bind off. And you know, you have to have the length of yarn for the body, which also I had way too much yarn. I was so frustrated when I got to the end, and I literally had probably 2 yards of yarn too many. So I was pulling all of that through every time, which means that all of these drivers are sitting in the car watching me as I'm sewing and pulling for the 200 plus stitches that I had to bind off. It was comical. It was so frustrating though, but it did force me to get it done. And I literally got there, started the bind off, and she texted me that she had gotten off of her flight just as I was wrapping it up. So it was perfect timing to do it. But I'm just glad that I was able to get that done. And now we just have the button placket. So, oh my gosh, stop talking. Let me put this on my body so we can see what we've got going on. I do just have a few stitch markers acting as placeholders for buttons because otherwise you cannot tell. It's just two giant flaps. So let's try this on. This is also why I wore this top today because, again, I do want to see how it's comparing to the fit. There we go. All right. I think that the top is fitting literally perfectly, and the top is already blocked. Like I said, I had blocked it part of the way through. Having this on now too reminds me that as I tried this on throughout the week to make sure that the length was right, I was kind of realizing I'm going to wear this and I'm never going to stop wearing black. However, I don't know if it's this particular it has a slightly washed black look about it. So it leans a little bit more of like a gray black. And I think that having just finished the Vest Claire and that really rich chocolatey brown, is it just me or does this kind of wash me out a little bit? Again, I'm going to wear it regardless, and I have so much black in my wardrobe. I'm never going to stop wearing black, but I do think I am right in feeling this transition to wanting to wear more chocolate browns and just very deep, dark chocolate browns, as opposed to black. I don't know. Can you see that? I'll try to find a picture of the Vest Claire and maybe just post it right here so we could see this side by side. But I do think that I should gravitate a little bit more towards those rich dark browns more than dark gray blacks in the future. Again, I'm not going to stop wearing black, but I just thought that was an interesting thing. So yes, the top half of this is blocked. The bottom half of it is not. So let's stand up and see what we got. Yay! I think that this is fitting really well. Like I said, it is a little bit of a gamble with the length because even if I block it and it shrinks up, I don't know that I can trust that that's how it's going to stay. And I think that this might be a situation where I would rather err a little bit on the side of being too short rather than too long because I do intend to wear this strictly with high-waisted garments. So I can always, I don't know, kind of fiddle around with that a little bit, but we will see. I just know that if it's too long, I'm not going to wear it. So I don't know. We'll have to see. Hopefully, if it does wind up shrinking up and blocking, maybe if I kind of put it on a hanger and steam it and give it a little tug, it'll return. Because I think at the moment, it's like an inch longer than I want it to be. So hopefully, the blocking saves the day. All I have left is the button placket, which hopefully I will be getting done by next week. Hopefully this is done and blocked by next week. And then the only other thing it still needs is buttons. And I think having it on and actually everything that I just said about the color and all of that, I think I am leaning towards a more sort of tortoiseshell style button for this one, rather than a shell or like a mother of pearl button. I think that something that will kind of warm it up a little bit and give it a little bit more of that richness is going to be better for me, for my wardrobe, for all of that. So I'm really liking it though. I've also really enjoyed just the process of knitting this so much. I could definitely see myself knitting another one of them in the future, as well as the clematis. I'm trying to remember how she said it. The sweater version. I just think it's a really fun twist on basic. I also, could you wear it backwards? The back cast on edge is just a straight line. So I don't know how it would look backwards, but maybe when it has buttons on, I'll just try it to see because that's always really fun too. So I think that was all I really had to say about it. I did want to share a quick little story. This is definitely more of a rambly episode than usual. I hope you don't mind, but I had been working on this week at a coffee shop while I was waiting for new tires to be put on the car. And there was a really sweet mom with her two children and one of them being her little girl. She was probably about 8 years old or so. And they came up to me while I was knitting on this and she said, "Oh, my daughter was admiring your knitting. You looked so peaceful over there." And I was like, "Oh, thank you so much." I said, "Are you interested in knitting?" And mom said that she crochets, and her daughter said that she was really interested in knitting and crocheting. And right now she's sewing. And the way that she said it, she was like, "Oh, you're working on your pillow right now, right, Nora?" And I was like, "Is your name Nora?" And her name was Nora. So obviously we were instant friends and she was asking, what did she ask? Something like, "Oh, I've been sewing. I don't know what knitting actually is though." So then I was just showing her a little bit of how, I told her the crochet is when you use the hook, and when it's knitting, you have two needles. And so I showed her, I was like, "This is all it is. This is how you knit a stitch." So, it looks kind of tricky, but I bet you could figure it out if you really wanted to. And she was really excited about it. And I just thought it was so funny. Like, what are the chances that her name was Nora? We bonded very fast. So it's always really fun when you're out in the wild and someone says something about your knitting. I actually had two experiences this week where I was wearing my knitting. The first one, I had worn my corsavin cardigan to work a wedding over the past weekend. And I went to go put my sweater back on after I had taken it off to work in. And I saw one of the bridesmaids looking at my sweater and she was like, "It's like a really nice sweater. Where did you get that?" I was like, "I knit it." And the whole room, they were like, "No, you didn't." I said, "Yes." And then she had an interesting anecdote to add. She said, "But it looks really nice." And I was like, "Thank you." Knitting can look really nice. I think that's one of those things where I find it really fun to go out into the world in my knits because I think a lot of people who don't knit or don't have knitters in their life, or maybe those who do, but are making more garments that have a very handmade look about them. I think that a lot of times people don't realize that you can make sweaters that look like something that comes from the store. And so if your personal style isn't really in line with a very handmade and kind of craftsy artisanal look, I think that to see someone in a knit that you're like, "Where did you buy that?" And someone to say, "No, I actually made it." They're like, "Wow, I didn't know that you could actually hand make something that looks store bought." And that's a really cool thing to be able to bring into people's lives. I had also worn my Tulsa tank that I just finished last week out to the stores the other day. And I repaired a floor in my Tulsa tank. Things you would only do for your father. But I was out in that and I got a compliment. Someone said, "Oh my gosh, I love your shirt." I was like, "Thank you, I made it." And she wound up telling everyone around, she's like, "She made her shirt." I was like, "Thank you, I did." So man, is it fun to wear your knits. It's always fun to be working on them in public and for people to wonder, and you get to, share a little bit about it. Who knows? Maybe in the future that little girl is going to want to take up knitting and she'll remember seeing the girl that looked really relaxed while drinking her coffee and knitting in the coffee shop. So I just thought that'd be a fun little story to share. And this is the project I was working on when they saw me. And I'm excited to wear this out and about and see who all is into this one. And I'm really loving it myself. So that is all I have to say about the clematis. If I didn't say already, it's been on the needles for 24 days. And I think it's reasonable to say that I should be able to finish the button placket. If not this weekend, then certainly by the next time I film. So those are all of the whips that I have going at the moment. Those are all part of my summer knitting plans. So it's exciting to see them going. Speaking of summer knitting plans, if I kind of transition into plans a little bit, this is what I am thinking. So I have been considering the end of summer and beginning of fall being that September 21st mark. And so my goal was to have done by that time the clematis vest, the Cordelia skirt, and the matching top, as well as to finish my sand cardigan that has been in hibernation, but I'm planning to get done by the end of summer. So I think that what I'm thinking about right now is finish the clematis vest. I think at that point, I'm going to officially bring out the sand cardigan and get that button placket done before I cast on the Cordelia vest. Because I could wear the clematis vest with the Cordelia skirt, that was always an intention of mine. I think that that could be a good summer outfit. Without needing the Cordelia vest done quite as soon. But I do really want the Cordelia vest done, especially because I've been seeing there's a non-knitting YouTuber that I follow who has a very similar vest. And I'm like, oh, I wish I had mine done now. So I do think that I want to get that going, but I'm trying to think about my projects in order of when I want to wear them. And I think that the sand cardigan really does have a place in my wardrobe right now. And so I want to get that done for now. Whereas that Cordelia vest, by the time I finished it, it's going to feel a little bit out of season. So I'm okay with that kind of pushing a little bit closer to the end of summer or maybe until next year. I haven't quite decided yet because I do really want it, but it feels like I'm getting closer and closer to it just not getting done this year. And I might have to accept that, especially as my mind is wandering into fall knits. And so I'm thinking of possibly pushing up my fall knitting start date and just allowing some of the summer knits to trickle into it. So I'm feeling like probably a little bit before the 21st is when I'm going to officially be starting some of my true fall projects. But I think I will not allow myself to do so until the sand cardigan is done. So those are a few of just, my plans, kind of where my mind is at with summer versus fall knits, because I'm very excited to get started on some of those. So hopefully you're still into summer knits because that's what this has been today. But please know that I am transitioning along with you very, very soon, just trying to stay on top of things. Anyway, I believe that is all I have to share with you today. Yeah, I think that that's where we're at. If it seems like my brain's in a million places, it's because it is. I also think I probably look and sound just about as tired as I feel today, and that's all right. So I'm going to go have a snack and then get this video edited, and I hope that you have enjoyed. If you did, I would so appreciate it if you would go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. If you subscribe and ring the bell, you're going to be notified anytime I post a new video. However, I do post a podcast video just like this one every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And with all of that, big ol' thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. All right, you guys. Bye!